The axe knew the weight of a man's work long before it knew the weight of a man. It rested against the wall of the smokehouse, its hickory handle worn smooth and dark with the sweat of 100 hands, its head a crescent of pitted, hungry steel. To Joseph, it was as familiar as his own shadow. He had used it to split oak for the winter fires in the big house, to clear cypress knees from the sodden earth near the bayou, to shape fence posts that drew a hard line between what was owned and what was wild. The axe was a tool of order, an instrument of the master's will. But in the pre-dawn stillness of that last Tuesday in October, as a low mist crept from the Mississippi and tangled itself in the Spanish moss, the axe felt different in his hand. It felt like a question. Joseph was a creature of the house. His world was one of polished mahogany and the scent of beeswax, of starched linen, and the quiet, clipped tones of Mistress Eleanor. His hands, though strong, were not calloused like those of the field hands. They were accustomed to the delicate weight of a silver tray, the precise fold of a napkin, the careful uncorking of a bottle of claret. He moved through the Barrow plantation, a grand white temple of columns and envy perched on the bluffs above Natchez, with an unnerving silence. He was a ghost in his own life, an observer whose presence was so constant it had become invisible. He saw the rot beneath the gilding, the hairline fractures in the porcelain smiles of Master Thomas Barrow and his wife. He heard the whispers in the hallways, the brittle laughter that failed to conceal the casual cruelty that was the true foundation of the house. He was Joseph of Natchez, but he belonged to no place, least of all to himself. His privilege, as the other slaves saw, that was a finer cage. He ate scraps from the master's table instead of cornmeal and salt pork. He slept on a pallet in a dry corner of the kitchen instead of a damp cabin. But he was still a prisoner, and his proximity to the flame of the Barrows' world only made him more aware of the cold darkness that surrounded them all. He saw the ledgers where his name was listed alongside horses and bales of cotton, his value calculated in dollars, his humanity a non-negotiable absence. He had taught himself to read by candlelight, piecing together words from discarded newspapers and the spine of a Bible left open in the parlor. The words were a secret well of water in a desert of ignorance, but they were also a torment. To read of freedom, of liberty, of a world where a man's soul was his own, was to feel the bars of his cage press deeper into his flesh. The catalyst for the change, the grit in the oyster that would produce a pearl of terrible black, was Silas Blackwood. He was the overseer, a man whose ambition was as sharp and ugly as a shard of broken glass. He had not been born to the planter class. He was a poor white farmer from the piney woods, his own land lost to debt and drought. He carried that failure like a stone in his gut, and he sought to purge his own humiliation by grinding it into the faces of the men and women he controlled. He was not like the master, whose cruelty was abstract and systemic. Blackwood's cruelty was intimate. It lived in the flick of his wrist as he coiled his leather whip, in the wet, eager look in his pale eyes as he watched a man's back split open, in the low, mocking tone he used, a voice that could strip a person of their name and leave them as nothing more than a breathing object of his contempt. Blackwood had a special disdain for Joseph. He resented the house slave's clean clothes, his quiet composure, the intelligence he saw flickering in Joseph's dark, watchful eyes. To Blackwood, Joseph was an affront, a symbol of a hierarchy within the slave system that he, a white man, could not fully breach. He sought to break Joseph, to drag him down into the muck of the fields, to see him sweat and bleed and beg. He would find reasons to send Joseph out to the cotton rows, forcing him to trade the silver tray for a hoe, deliberately setting him tasks he was unaccustomed to, just to watch him struggle. "Think you're better than the dirt, don't you, boy?" Blackwood would sneer, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey and chewing tobacco. "The dirt is what you are, what you'll always be." The heart of the matter, as it so often was, concerned a woman. Her name was Sarah. She was a field hand, her skin the color of rich delta earth, her body made strong and weary by the ceaseless labor of planting and chopping and picking. But in her eyes, Joseph saw a light that the cotton fields could not extinguish. They would meet in stolen moments, in the deep shade of a live oak at the edge of the quarters, their words whispered, their hands barely touching. She was his connection to the world beyond the big house, to the shared suffering and the secret resilience of his people. Her laughter was a forbidden melody, a sound of life in a place dedicated to a slow death. Loving her was the most dangerous act of rebellion Joseph had yet committed. Blackwood saw their connection. He saw it in the way Joseph's gaze would linger on her as she walked to the well. In the extra piece of bread Joseph would slip her from the kitchen, and he used it. He began to torment Sarah, assigning her the most brutal tasks, denying her water, his whip always hovering near her. He was not punishing Sarah. He was torturing Joseph, using her body as his instrument. Each lash that fell on her back was a blow against Joseph's soul. Joseph's quiet dignity began to fray. The ghost in the house began to feel the stirrings of a solid, furious flesh. The air in Natchez that autumn was thick with the smell of money and decay. Cotton was king, a greedy, white-fisted monarch, and the city on the bluff was its throne room. Down below, under the bluff, lay Natchez under the hill, a riot of taverns, brothels, and gambling dens, where boatmen and cutthroats drowned their sins in the muddy waters of the Mississippi. Joseph had been there once, sent on an errand by the master. He had seen the raw, chaotic freedom of the white men there, their lives dissolute and dangerous, but their own. The contrast with the rigid, suffocating order of the plantation was a physical blow. He saw how the same river that carried the cotton to New Orleans, the source of the Barrow's wealth, could also be a path to escape. The thought, once planted, began to grow roots in the dark soil of his mind. A recurring symbol began to haunt him: the mockingbird. There was one that nested in the magnolia tree outside the parlor window. It sang all day, a frantic, brilliant medley of stolen songs. It could mimic the whistle of the riverboat, the cry of the hawk, the tune Mistress Eleanor would play on her spinet. It was a master of imitation, but it had no song of its own. Joseph felt a kinship with the bird. He had learned to mimic the perfect servant, to wear a mask of placid obedience. He spoke the master's language, served the master's food, lived by the master's clock. But what was his own song? What sound would he make if he were ever truly free? He started to notice the bird's frantic energy, the way it was always watching, always on edge. He saw a predator in its mimicry, a desperate survival. The tension on the plantation was drawing tighter, like a knot in a rope. One evening, after a long day of Blackwood's taunts, Joseph found Old Man Cato sitting by his cabin, carving a piece of cypress wood. Cato was the oldest slave on the Barrow place, his memory a library of sorrows and survivals. He had been born in Africa, he claimed, and he remembered a world of different gods and different trees. He looked up at Joseph, his eyes cloudy with age but still sharp. "That man walks on your shadow, son," Cato said, not needing to speak Blackwood's name. His voice was a dry rustle, like leaves skittering across hard ground. "He wants to see what you made of on the inside." "I'm made of the same as any other man," Joseph replied, his voice low. Cato spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "That's what he's afraid of. A man can be reasoned with. A man can be broken. But an idea is a troublesome thing. And he sees an idea in your eyes, Joseph. Be careful it don't burn you up from the inside out." Cato held up the piece of wood he was carving. It was taking the shape of a bird, but its wings were stiff, and its beak was open in a silent scream. "Some birds ain't meant for cages, but the world is full of cages." The breaking point came on a humid Monday afternoon. A summer storm had delayed the cotton harvest, and Blackwood was driving the field hands with a demonic fury. A young boy, no older than 12, collapsed from heat and exhaustion. Blackwood, enraged by the delay, stood over the boy with his whip. Sarah cried out, a small, involuntary plea. "He just a child, Master Blackwood." Blackwood's head snapped around, his eyes, small and pale, fixed on her. "Did you say something, girl?" Before she could answer, he strode over to her. The whip cracked, not with the full force he used on the men, but with a sharp, stinging precision that was meant to humiliate. He struck her once across the shoulders, the sound a sharp slap in the suffocating air. He struck her again across the legs. Joseph was watching from the porch of the big house, where he had been sent to polish the brass railings. He felt each blow as if it were his own. His hands gripped the brass rails so tightly his knuckles turned white. The polished metal reflected a distorted image of his face, his features twisted in a mask of silent rage he did not recognize. Blackwood leaned close to Sarah, his voice a venomous whisper that carried on the still air. "Next time you speak out of turn, I'll stake you out for the night flies. Let's see what song you sing then." That night, Joseph could not sleep. The image of the welt rising on Sarah's skin was burned into his mind. He lay on his pallet, the sounds of the house settling around him, the creak of floorboards, the distant chime of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out the seconds of his bondage. He thought of the axe. The thought was no longer abstract. It was cold and heavy and real. He imagined its edge, honed to a razor sharpness on the grinding stone behind the barn. He imagined its weight, the perfect balance of head and handle. He saw it not as a tool of labor, but as an instrument of finality, an answer. He slipped out of the kitchen before the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky. The air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of the river and the rich, loamy scent of the delta. He moved with the practiced silence of a hunter, his bare feet making no sound on the packed earth. The plantation was asleep, a slumbering beast, its breathing the low hum of insects and the distant croak of frogs in the bayou. The smokehouse was unlocked. The axe was there, leaning where he had left it. He picked it up. The smooth hickory felt alive in his hand. It seemed to thrum with a terrible energy, a purpose that had lain dormant within the steel and wood for years. He tested the edge with his thumb. It was sharp enough to shave with. Sharp enough. He did not go to the fields. He went to the edge of the cypress swamp, to a place where the neat rows of cotton dissolved into a tangled wilderness of shadows and secrets. He knew Blackwood's routine. Every morning, just as the sun was breaking the horizon, the overseer would ride his gray mare along the edge of the property, a solitary patrol to ensure no one had tried to run during the night. He would ride along the old logging trace that bordered the swamp, a place where the mist was thickest, where the world was still caught between night and day. Joseph found his spot, a massive cypress. Its base, a gnarled fortress of roots, stood near the path. He concealed himself behind it, melting into the deep shadows. The axe he held loosely at his side. He was not a creature of the house anymore. He was not a ghost. He was a man waiting in the half-light, his heart, a steady, heavy drum against his ribs. He was terrifyingly calm. The years of swallowed anger, of silent observation, of forced invisibility, had distilled themselves into this single, pure moment of intent. He did not have to wait long. He heard the horse first, the soft thud of its hooves on the damp earth. Then he saw it, a pale shape emerging from the swirling fog. Blackwood was a dark silhouette atop the mare, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He rode slowly, his head turning from side to side, his eyes scanning the tree line. He was the guardian of the cage, the wolf patrolling the fence. As Blackwood drew level with the cypress tree, a sound broke the stillness. It was the mockingbird, the one from the magnolia tree, or one just like it. It let out a piercing, frantic cry. a jumble of stolen sounds that seemed to mock the very silence of the dawn. For a single, fatal second, Blackwood's attention was diverted. He glanced up into the branches, a flicker of annoyance on his face. It was all the time Joseph needed. He moved from behind the tree in a single, fluid motion. He was not rushing. His steps were deliberate, measured. Blackwood heard him, a rustle in the leaves, and turned in the fade saddle. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in a flash of understanding and raw fear. His mouth opened to shout, to raise the alarm, to call for help that would not come. Joseph did not see a man. He saw a symbol. He saw the whip, the sneer, the ledgers, the cage. He saw the welt on Sarah's skin. He swung the axe. It was not a wild, clumsy blow. It was precise, economical, all the strength of his body and all the weight of his rage concentrated into a single, perfect arc. The steel was a silver whisper in the misty air. It made a sound when it struck, a dense, wet thud that was unlike the clean crack of splitting wood. It was a sound that ended a world. Silas Blackwood tumbled from his saddle without a cry. He fell into the damp leaves, a broken puppet whose strings had been cut. The gray mare, spooked, shied and galloped back towards the stables, its empty saddle a frantic message of disaster. Joseph stood over the body, his chest heaving. The axe was heavy in his hand now, impossibly heavy. He looked down at what he had done. The dawn was breaking in earnest, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. The light touched the axe head, and the steel that had been gray was now a startling, vibrant crimson. The mist swirled around his feet, as if trying to wash the ground clean. The mockingbird had fallen silent. The only sound was the frantic beating of his own heart and the distant, panicked whinny of the mare. He did not feel triumph. He did not feel relief. He felt a vast, terrifying emptiness. The act was done. The question had been answered. And in answering it, he had unmade himself. Joseph, the house slave, was gone. In his place was a killer, a fugitive, a thing to be hunted. He did not wait for the alarm bell to ring, for the shouts, for the Vigijo dogs. He knew they would come. He dropped the axe. It fell beside the body of Silas Blackwood, a full stop at the end of a bloody sentence. He turned and ran, not back towards the plantation, but into the cypress swamp. The swamp swallowed him whole. It was a labyrinth of black water and twisted trees, of sucking mud and hanging moss that clawed at his face like skeletal fingers. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of rot and life, of decay and genesis. The neat, ordered world of the plantation, with its straight lines and rigid hierarchies, was gone. Here, everything was tangled, chaotic, and alive. The sound of the plantation's alarm bell, a frantic, clanging peal of rage, pursued him, but it grew fainter and fainter, until it was just another sound in the cacophony of the swamp, the shriek of a hawk, the bellow of an alligator, the hum of a million insects. He ran until his lungs burned, and his legs were slick with mud and blood from unseen thorns. He stumbled through water that was cold and dark, his feet sinking into a primordial ooze. He was no longer Joseph of Natchez. He was just a man, running for his life in a world that did not know his name. The hunt began within the hour. Master Thomas Barrow, his face a mask of cold fury, assembled a posse. It was a motley collection of neighboring planters, their sons, and hired slave catchers from under the hill, men whose faces were as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. They brought their best dogs, lean, hungry hounds with lolling tongues and eyes that burned with a predatory light. They were experts in the art of pursuit, the science of terror. They found the body easily. The scene was a tableau of brutal simplicity: the fallen overseer, the discarded axe, the trampled leaves. The dogs caught the scent immediately, a clear, strong trail leading directly into the swamp. The men followed, their boots sinking into the mud, their voices loud and confident. It was a sport to them, a thrilling and righteous chase. They would have the runaway treed by noon, they boasted. They would make an example of him that would be spoken of in whispers for a generation. But the swamp was not the fields. It was an ally to the fugitive, a co-conspirator in his escape. It confused the senses, distorted sound, and erased tracks. The clear trail of scent quickly became a tangled mess as Joseph waded through stagnant pools and doubled back on his own path. The dogs grew confused, whining and circling, their confident bays turning to frustrated yelps. The men cursed, swatting at mosquitoes that rose in thick, whining clouds. The oppressive humidity sapped their strength, and the shadows played tricks on their eyes. A rotten log looked like a lurking man. The sway of Spanish moss seemed to be a figure dropping from a branch. Joseph, meanwhile, was pushing deeper, guided by instinct and a desperate will to survive. He thought of Old Man Cato's stories of the swamp, of the hidden paths, of the places where the ground was solid. He moved, not like a man, but like an animal, his senses heightened. He heard the baying of the dogs, but he also heard the rustle of a snake in the undergrowth, the splash of a turtle slipping from a log. He was becoming a part of this wild, wet world. The fear was a constant, cold presence in his belly, but it was a fear that sharpened his mind, that fueled his body. Days turned into a blur of gray light and black night. He ate what he could find, bitter roots he recognized from Cato's teachings, a frog he caught and ate raw, its cold flesh a shock in his mouth. He drank the dark tea-colored water of the bayou, praying it would not sicken him. He was stalked by hunger, by exhaustion, and by the ghosts of his own mind. In the feverish twilight, the cypress knees looked like hooded figures, kneeling in prayer. He would see Blackwood's face in the ripples on the water, his eyes wide in that last moment of surprise. He would hear Sarah's voice on the wind, calling his name, a sound of both love and lament. The hunters did not give up easily. For a week, they plunged into the swamp, their determination fueled by rage and the need to maintain order. They found signs of him, a footprint in the mud, a broken branch, a piece of his shirt torn on a briar patch, but they never found him. It was as if he was a phantom, always one step ahead, dissolving into the mist just as they closed in. The swamp was protecting him, hiding him in its vast, indifferent heart. The men began to grumble. The swamp was a cursed place, they said. It was full of fevers and bad spirits. They told stories of other runaways who had vanished into its depths, their bones picked clean by gators and gar. The hunt, which had begun as a confident assertion of power, devolved into a fearful, reluctant patrol. Eventually, Master Barrow called it off. They would post a reward, a massive sum for Joseph, dead or alive. His name and description would be on broadsheets from New Orleans to Memphis. But the active hunt was over. The swamp had won. The men rode back to their plantations, their faces grim, leaving behind only the trampled mud and the lingering scent of their failure. They left Joseph to the gators and the cottonmouths, certain that nature would exact the justice they had been denied. Joseph never knew when the hunt ended. He only knew that one day, the distant sound of the dogs was gone. The silence that replaced it was profound. A living entity. It was the silence of a world without bells, without whips, without masters. It was a terrifying and exhilarating freedom. He kept moving north, following the constellations Cato had taught him to read. He was gaunt, his body a roadmap of scars and insect bites. He was no longer the quiet, composed house slave. He was something wilder, harder. He had survived the plantation, and he had survived the swamp. He did not know what lay ahead, only that it was a future he would meet on his own terms. He was a story, a whisper on the wind, a ghost who had walked out of his own grave. The fate of Joseph of Natchez became a blank page. Some said he was taken by a fever in the swamp, his body sinking into the mud to become one with the cypress roots. Others swore he was caught by patrollers a year later, up in Tennessee, and hanged without ceremony. But there were other stories, too. Whispers among the enslaved passed from plantation to plantation like a secret gospel. They said he made it. They said he crossed the Ohio River on a block of ice in the dead of winter. They said he joined a community of free blacks in Canada, that he learned to write, and that he spent the rest of his days helping others find their way to freedom on the Underground Railroad. They said he took a new name, that he never spoke of Natchez or the Barrow Plantation again. But they said that sometimes, on a still night, he would look at his hands and remember the weight of the axe, the terrible price of his own song. The story of Joseph became a legend on the Barrow place. It was a ghost story the white children told each other, of the phantom house slave with an axe who haunted the edge of the swamp at dawn. For the slaves, it was something else entirely. It was a story of defiance, a myth of retribution. They called him the Axeman. They said his spirit still walked the cypress maze, a guardian for other runaways. When a slave disappeared into the swamp and the dogs lost their trail, the others would nod knowingly. The Axeman was watching over them. The act of violence, brutal and final, had been transformed by memory and hope into an act of liberation. Years passed. The world changed. The war came and went, a storm of fire and blood that swept away the world of the Barrows. The big house still stood, but it was a decaying shell, its white columns stained, its windows dark and empty. The fields lay fallow. The slaves were free, though their freedom was a fragile, embattled thing. An old woman sat on the porch of a small, weathered cabin not far from what was once the Barrow Plantation. It was Sarah. Her hair was white, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles. Her hands, though gnarled with age and arthritis, were at rest in her lap. A young man, a writer from a northern newspaper, sat on a stool before her, a notebook in his hand. He had come south to collect the stories of the formerly enslaved, to build an archive of memory against the tide of forgetting. He had heard the legend of the Axeman and had traced it back to her. "Can you tell me about him?" the young man asked, his voice gentle. "The man they called Joseph." Sarah was silent for a long time, her eyes looking out towards the dark line of the cypress swamp, shimmering in the heat. "Joseph," she said, her voice a soft, raspy whisper. "He was a quiet man. He kept his soul in a deep place, where nobody could touch it. He saw everything, the way a mockingbird will steal a song, 'cause it ain't got one of its own. He saw how we was all doing that, singing the master's song, wearing the master's clothes, living by the master's time." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The world is built on lines. The line between the field and the house, the line between a man and a thing, the line between what you can bear and what will break you. Master Blackwood, he didn't see no lines. He just saw property. He wanted to own Joseph's soul, same as he owned his body." "And the morning?" the writer prompted softly. "What do you remember of that?" "I remember the screaming of the bell," Sarah said, her eyes distant. "Felt like the world was coming to an end. Or maybe a new one was beginning. They hunted him. They went into that swamp full of pride, and they came out full of fear. The swamp, it keeps its secrets. It doesn't care about our lines, our laws." "Do you think he made it?" the writer asked. "Do you think he found freedom?" Sarah looked down at her hands. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "He was free the moment he picked up that axe. The rest is just geography." She looked back at the young man, her gaze clear and direct. "Freedom ain't a place you get to, son. It's a thing you are, a thing you decide to be. It might last a lifetime, or it might last for the single moment it takes a man to swing an axe. But in that moment, he was the master of his own life. He had his own song. It was a terrible song, but it was his. The writer wrote it all down, trying to capture the poetry and the sorrow in her words. When he was done, he thanked her and left. Sarah remained on her porch, watching the sun set over the Mississippi. The light turned the sky to a bruised purple and a fiery orange, the color of a fresh wound. From the deep woods she heard the call of a mockingbird, a frantic, beautiful, and stolen melody. But beneath it, she thought she could hear something else, a deeper note, a silence that was not empty, but full. The silence of a man who had reclaimed his name, even if it meant he had to lose it forever. The swamp was dark now, holding the story of Joseph of Natchez.